Back to Ye Focus Fulcha. Hi, hello, and welcome. It is John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and we are here with our weekly check-in chat and coffee talk. Today's topic is probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's a sharing of perspectives in regards to conflict. I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs or whatever, but I'm just going to share a bit of a personal view in regards to how maybe we should look at these things. But before we dive into that topic, I'd like to invite you to pop on down into the description and pick up the free resource we have available for you, which is a list of good and recommended resources from the Irish Pagan School. It can be quite challenging to kind of understand and to navigate your spiritual growth and your spiritual path because there's been a lot of, to be fair, it was the information that was available at the time, but wasn't good information. So there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of kind of poorly thought out, a lot of appropriated content out there, which has formed a foundation in some ways for current views of paganism and Irish spirituality in some way, shape, and form. So given that that's really not good resources that can be undermining someone in their path and their attempt to kind of grow and understand, we kind of tried to say, okay, well, here's the list. Here's the list of everything that we would recommend. It's not by any means the only list, the most extensive list, but it's what we can say here as the Irish Pagan School is good resources from a spiritual point of view, but from a cultural point of view as well, and from an ethical point of view. So if you're interested, pop on down, get yourself onto our mailing list where you'll receive reminders about what great stuff is coming out from us every week. And you'll be able to get that download free list of resources. So to get back to the point really, it is conflict. It is conflict, and it is something that is tragic and terrible, but it is also something that's very unfortunately common to the human condition. Now, I'm going to preface this right up front. I am not here to advocate for any side. I'm not here to advocate for any, particular political agenda or any particular kind of spirituality or nation. What the purpose of this talk is really to just offer some perspective for consideration. If you're not here for that, then please feel free to take yourself elsewhere, not in a bad way. If what I'm saying is, if your sense and sensitivity, if you're not here in the mindset of open-minded exploration, then maybe the video isn't for you, and that's totally fine, because you have to look after your own mental well-being at the end of the day. You have to look after your own kind of emotional and mental self-care, because that's part of the human condition. It's crucially important. So the reason why, as an Irish person, I wanted to kind of touch on what's currently going on and the kind of heightened global conflict that is over in Gaza at the moment is because it's just another explosion of what has been going on for a long period of time. Because people have been harming people in that area for a long fucking time, for 100 years or more. And the reason why Ireland gets so kind of caught in this is because in many ways it echoes some of what was done to our country. Because it was the British Empire who came in and drew lines on the world, really defined maps, and set out well, this is where this is going to be, and this is where that's going to be. This is these territories which are now fall under the British Crown for them to access resources. The English did it to Wales. English did it to Scotland to make their island of Great Britain. And then they cut their teeth in a whole extra level of colonization, plantations, and horror, really, which was done to Ireland. And so, yeah, we existed as a conquered people for over 800 years. And, when we've eventually, and this is how I'm going to try and couch this, folks, I'm going to speak from the Irish perspective, and maybe if anyone's interested, they might be able to look outside of and see how those correlations kind of cross over, or how comparatively there is conversation to be done. So what was done to Ireland was an intentional attempt to undermine the people of the island, to kind of dominate and to control, to eradicate their sense of culture, to eradicate their language, which is why I'm speaking to you in English, not in the native language of my country, which is Irish. next stages really were to eradicate our spirituality, you know. Now, of course, Christians have been here for a while doing all of their kind of stuff with it too. But when I think it was Henry VIII was like, yeah, I wanted another dispensation to divorce another wife. And the Pope was like, no, peace out, fuck you, not going to happen. He was like, fine, I'll start my own fucking religion. And in protest, he formed the Church of Ireland, oh no, Church of England, and set himself up at the head of the Church of England, and that became Protestants. Um, so we then had an influx of loyal English Protestant individuals who were given Ireland, given sections of the land in Ireland, and even Scottish kind of Protestants, Presbyterians, and there's a whole. It's literally called the Plantations. Crack a history book, look at this, and intentionally people were just moved on to the land in. Oh yeah, sure, we'll just give you this track of stuff in Ireland, and whoever's there just fucking move them on. Um, and that really became a bit of a fucking nightmare. Like, there were dispossessed people all over the country who were shoveled off their ancestral lands because some remote power had decided that they wanted to give it to their loyal followers. Um, that then kind of caused multiple generations of hate and resentment and anger and frustration, as well as a lot of impoverishment and a lot of harm and hurt. Um, we then get to the stage where our Irish people of the island, like, native people, are viewed as less than human in some ways. The propaganda kicks up about the whole barbaric, like thick Irish people who, oh, they don't know fucking nothing. They're like, they have no concept of no, you know, sense of higher values or nobility or education. And that's where the whole idea of the thick paddy comes from. Because it was intentional. The propaganda was put in place in order to demean people's perspectives, which led to the dehumanizing of Irish people, which then, carried on around the world as, the colonies over in the Americas. And, that culture of no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So there were generations of intentional debasement of our people done by this foreign power in order to justify their land grab, in order to justify their accruing of wealth. Now, of course, yeah, great. Here's all these English landlords who own these parts of our island, um, but they need people to work the island. So that's where we get into the the kind of rental. Irish people are like, well, you rent this land, and then whatever you kind of cultivate, that's what you have to pay in your taxes. That's what you have to pay to your landlord. And then we're up into the 1800s at this particular point, and anyone who's cracked the history book again, people talk about the look of the Irish. Like, read a fucking history book. Honestly, read a fucking history book. Because with the arrival of the 1840s, we had this entirely twisted state of affairs in the island where, like, foreign landowners kind of decided what they wanted and who owned what where, and anyone who didn't fit their bills was just move off, not here. And we had tenant farmers who were like trying to cultivate enough stuff to support and feed their families, but then also pay these tithes to these, exterior powerful individuals. And this is where the potato came again. Potato folks, not native to Ireland, introduced as a crop into Ireland because it's superfood, because it would grow on pretty much anything, and people could stay alive eating just potatoes. So yeah, potato plight, potato famine hit, and it's called on Gorta Moor. It's the Great Hunger, but from a certain perspective, it's a genocide because there's an eradication of the main staple food supply of the people of the island. But did the landlords kind of allow us to eat what was grown here? No, they still maintained their tithes because they followed a laissez-faire economic structure, which was, open free markets, supply and demand will dictate what the price of things should be. And well, and sort of again, I'm not going to say everyone in England was or Great Britain, sorry, was a heartless asshole. There were people who were like, well, we need to advocate for, human rights. We need to advocate for, like, taking care of people. And that's where we get the soup kitchens being set up. And the thing is with the soup kitchens, they were predominantly funded by the Church of England and by Protestants. And the intention was, yeah, of course, you can come and you can get fed, you can feed yourself and feed your family, but you need to be not Irish. And so that's where, I'm an O'Sullivan, but there is also a surname in Ireland of Sullivan who dropped the O. There are Connors and there are O'Connors. If you ever hear someone in Ireland refer to someone else as a soup taker, that means that their ancestors during the famine, during these worst of times, went to the soup kitchens in order to be fed for themselves and their families. But in order to do that, they had to deny their Irish heritage. And so that's where the surname literally Connor and Sullivan come from, because they dropped the O in order to conform. And it's not an unfamiliar thing. It's still absolutely happening. There are charities which do a lot of kind of collecting here in Ireland. Christian charities do a lot of collections here for people over in, like, when I was a kid, it was Ethiopia and the famines that were happening there. And many countries in the continent of Africa were in receipt of charity, but the charity was being presented to them in a heavily Catholic Christian like circumstance. Oh yeah, no, you can access this food, you can access all of these kind of things as long as you're a Catholic, as long as you're a Christian. So again, it's another form of cultural and ethical control, like ethnic control and dictation. Now I'm spinning off topic, but I'm trying to keep it where we are, because when we look at the histories of conflict, all of those hundreds of years of oppression and dominance by a foreign power on our island, dictating the structure of our land, dictating, like, who gets to live where, when they get to live, like, it leads to a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of resentment. And there were multiple, like, everyone talks about the Easter Rising of 1916 and the strive for Irish independence. That wasn't the only rebellion, folks. There were multiple rebellions before that, because the Irish people were aware that we were oppressed. And so we were constantly trying to struggle against an oppressive power who were more powerful than us, to try and be free, to try and understand, or to embrace our native culture, our ethnicity, our right to fucking live. Our right to fucking live as Irish people in Ireland. And so, again, I am specifically staying in my wheelhouse here. I'm specifically talking about Ireland, but if you're aware of, like, how this narrative is portraying, you can compare that to what is happening other places in the world and try and get an understanding that maybe there's kind of information that is kind of sounding similar, because the practice is the same. It was a foreign power who came in and dictated where the lines on the map need to go and who gets to be where each people are. And that was done based on the resources that they wanted to collect for themselves. And what we need to then look at is the impact of that power, the impact of who has power and what are they doing with it. Because Ireland was dominated for a very long period of time, and it led to a lot of hurt, a lot of resentment, as I said, generations of people, and generations of hate. When the Irish Free State was finally declared in 1921-22, England was kind of, okay, dealing with other kind of stuff at the time. We managed to get, okay, we have independence. We have a right to home rule here. We have a stepping stone towards a republic. The next thing that happened, we scrapped amongst ourselves the Irish Civil War, because of the hurt, the pain, and the resentment that had been put upon us for so long. Some people were like, okay, well, if we can take a moderated position, if we can take this, we can keep going. If we can take this, keep going. Others were like, well, no, it has to be everything or nothing. And so that's when we led to the Irish Civil War. And that carried on for a while until eventually we did get a republic. But the republic was formed without 6 counties of the island. And so, again, there was a power dynamic here. Someone else had defined a boundary or a border on a landscape and said who gets to be here and who gets to be there. Not just from, loyal to the English crown, but also, loyal to a particular form of spirituality or spiritual expression. And then that builds more resentment, that builds more hurt over time, and that builds extra layers to a conflict. And then we move into the Northern Ireland Troubles, the period of Troubles. From the formation of the Republic in 1920s, there was pretty much consistent violence in and around Northern Ireland, and it's referred to as sectarian violence because it was between Catholics and Protestants, but it was between, loyalists and unionists. It was between people who identified as, members of the UK and people who, identified as Irish of Ireland. And that carried on for, what was it, 76 years, until finally the violence aspect was ended in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement, which was finally a political agreement that agreed to power sharing and an acknowledgement of Northern Ireland on the island of Ireland by both parties, and to allow that there be a governing body that would rule Northern Ireland. And that was the end of bombings, killings, destruction, riots. And it wasn't military actions. It wasn't like, sorry, it's still a little bit upsetting, because I remember being in school and hearing about a bombing of a school in Omagh in Northern Ireland. The body count on both sides were regular people, normal humans, regardless of their political beliefs, regardless of their spiritual practices, regardless of their affiliations or their hopes or their dreams or their fears and their animosities. Children don't deserve to die. There it is. Nobody deserves to die. Like, and this is the upsetting part of all of it, because what it needs to come back to as we look at these things is to try and find compassion, is to try and query, where is our compassion in all of this? Don't forget about pointing fingers, forget about the blame game, forget about oh, well, you hit me first, so I have to hit you back, or well, you started it, so I have to retaliate. It's a body count. If hate is the driving factor, then all we ever get is generation upon generation of trauma, which leads to generation and generation that carry on the hate. 70 years, an entire generation of Irish people lived with troubles in Northern Ireland, myself included. Now, again, I in the Republic, down in Dublin, I wasn't going to, experience sectarian violence in my home. But my dad's ex-army. He did service on the border. He told me stories of having to come out of a morning when he was in billets or barracks up near there and check the car for bombs before he even went anywhere near it. He told me stories of when he was off shift. They were all told, don't wear your uniform. If you're going off barracks, you don't wear anything that identifies you as a soldier or anything that identifies you as from the Republic. But keep your pistol in your pocket. That's not safety. That's not security. That's not anything other than fear and survival. Is it right? Is it wrong? What we need to do when we're looking at these things, looking at these difficulties, is take a stance. Excuse me. Sorry. Part of me is trying not to cry. I'll be honest with you. We need to take a stance of compassion first. then we need to take an analytical look at power. Because what really needs to come down to is the question. Two questions. Who has the power and what are they doing with it? Oddly enough, Laura and I were in one of our morning walks having a conversation. And it oddly it was a conversation about a game, a role play game that we're involved in, Dungeons and Dragons, and the character I'm playing is advocates neutrality above all else. And there's a village that's being attacked by monsters, and I'm like, well, maybe the monsters that's their territorial hunting ground. Maybe the village is set up in their area. Like, just because they're different creatures doesn't mean they're, like, we know that they're intelligent creatures. So maybe there's a conflict going on here. Maybe there's something else, And Laura actually phrased it as like, okay, well, really what it comes down to at the end of the day is oppressor and oppressed. In this circumstance, who is the oppressor and who is being oppressed? Who has the power and who doesn't have the power? And then once you identify who that is, then you need to ask the question, those who have the power, what are they doing with it? And don't judge them by their words, judge them by their actions. When you have the power to deny people basic human rights and you exercise that power to deny people basic human rights, you're the bad guy. Regardless of getting into like international law, regardless of getting into kind of conversations about morality or conversations around, the rights and like, did I break the law? Did I not break the law? Where like any of that, like if you have the ability and exercise the power to deny people their basic human rights and you choose to do that, you're the bad guy. And, this can change. I'm not saying that one side is better than the other side, It's entirely possible that, one side may come to power or may have been in power and they may have committed the same kind of problems, the same kind of atrocities and issues. And so now it's this generational hate. It's just like, well, you gave me a black eye, so I have to give you a black eye because, we need to make up. We have the right to defend ourselves. We have a right to, strike back when we're struck at. I'm not advocating a Catholic turn the other cheek kind of thing. What I am actually advocating is when you have power, question very clearly your fucking use of it. Because our humanity is judged not by how we treat the best of us, but it's how we treat the worst of us. It's how we treat those who are at the most disadvantage, at the most risk, at the most vulnerable, or even those who have broken law, broken or stepped away from the socially constructed agreements that we collaboratively kind of all as a species say, yeah, this is right, this is wrong. That's what human rights are. It's not some fictitious kind of idea or structure of ideology. It is a basic fundamental belief that people have a right, a human has a right to life, has a right to education, has a right to, safety, has a right to food. Now, there's a broader kind of thing to look at across all societies when we bring that right the way down, because where are the homeless people in our societies? Where are like those who don't have access to education in our societies? There's a bigger conversation to be had around this. But when we're looking at this area of what's going on right now, this area of conflict, again, and I am speaking mainly from the history perspective of an Irish person who understands what it's like to live in a partially oppressed country. Now, again, I'm fucking born in the 1980s, folks. It's a long way from me to, have lived in order to struggle for independence, to struggle to create a republic. I had the boon and benefit of being born in that. Born in 1981, it was 1998 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. I was 17 years old. there had still been troubles in Northern Ireland for all of my life up until that point. I took 2 trips to Belfast when I was a kid, and on the train up to Belfast, it stopped. And I looked at my dad and was like, "Why have we stopped? Why are we sitting here?" I was like fucking 9 or 10. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, they're just checking the train for bombs before we cross the border." I remember getting off the train in Belfast. I was going to a dinosaur exhibit with my dad, and there were armed soldiers right there. It was the first time I've seen a fully armed, you know, automatic rifle wielding soldier in my life. And he was just standing there looking at people getting off a train out of Dublin. And my dad said to me, "Keep your eyes down and keep walking." Because he'd done service. He knew what it was like up and around. It is, and it has to always come back to who has the power and what are they doing with it. And if they're not doing the right things with it, then it shouldn't be, well, they've the right to defend themselves. They've a right to kind of address. It's like, no, they have a responsibility to wield what power they are given ethically and humanely. And if people are fucking dying, if children are being harmed, then no one is right. Everyone is wrong. And people need to find some way to stop hurting and start talking. 1998, folks. It's not that long ago. It's not that long ago at all. And that Good Friday Agreement or Belfast Agreement, depending on which way you want to look it up in the history, was an end to violence. It was a cessation of violence to allow for a conversation around political power sharing, mutual acknowledgement, you know, addressing inequalities, addressing discrimination. All of it happened from that point because the first thing everyone fucking agreed on was we need to stop killing each other. You can tell I have strong feelings. You can tell I'm hurt by this. And people wonder or people ask, why do Irish people seem to sympathize with Palestine? And it's not because, they helped when we were going through similar struggles. It's because, geez, they went through some of the same shit and are still going through some of the same shit we did. And both Israel and Palestine have done terrible things to each other. No one's hands are clean. I'm not advocating one side or the other. I'm not advocating who's right, who's wrong. It's not on me as an Irish person, not directly involved in this conflict, to tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. But as a human, I will turn around and say that people deserve their human rights to be respected. And if your conflict has a body count of children, you're doing it fucking wrong. All idiots. So these have been my opinions. um, it's not easy, folks. It absolutely isn't. And we are all lessened by the loss of youth. Like, which one of those children could have been the next advocate for peace, the next kind of, like the loss of potential is huge. Now, again, same, some of them could have grown up and carried on the cycle of violence and trauma. Like, if you want to start getting into minutiae and pedantry about it. Sorry, I was going to spin off again, and that doesn't serve us here today. Um, Final thoughts. Yeah, Who has the power? What are they doing with it? And when you are against and outmatched by a powerful opponent, you do what you have to do. You do what you try and do. Doesn't mean you're right. Just because someone's more powerful than you, doesn't mean you get to hold your hands up and be like, well, we were justified in our actions. But sometimes you need to try and be loud in order to get attention. And I feel like I'm saying the wrong things now because there is no justification. Everyone is wrong. And then only by acknowledging how we need to stop killing each other, that we need to start talking about stuff. We need to start breaking down the definitions, breaking down what was put upon us by other powers, what is the handed down trauma for being colonized, that we can actually begin to say, okay, well, I see you and acknowledge you for who you are. I may disagree. I may worship differently. I may speak differently. I might be educated differently, but that doesn't mean you're any less. That doesn't invalidate your right to respect. That doesn't invalidate your right to, living, security. Yeah, sorry, I'm obviously moved by it and very upset about it. And I'm trying very carefully and cautiously to express an opinion without condemnation and without dragging into political stuff or spiritual stuff or religious stuff. Like, at the end of the day, if we're still killing each other, then we're not listening. If there's weapons going off and bombs going off, if people are screaming in pain and hurt, then no one can hear anything else. Thanks for listening to me today. Thanks for allowing me a safe space in order to kind of express my opinions and to get stuff off my chest. I'm speaking as an Irish person, and there was some fucking shit, terrible stuff done to Irish people in the past. And yeah, we're still dealing with it. We're still dealing with post-colonial trauma. We still have drink culture. We still have a whole lot of stuff that we have to figure out. We're still trying to, establish ourselves in the absence of other political powers, who and what we are as a nation. 100 years old. The Republic of Ireland is 100 years old. Almost, is it? Is it 19? Oh, we're coming up on 100 years old. The 1916 was 100 years, and we've had a couple of years since then. So the Free State is 100 years old, because that was 1922. Yeah, so the Republic isn't even 100 years old. We're still figuring shit out. And I just hope that we'll get there. At the end of the day, folks, look after yourselves. That's all you can really do. And hopefully we can keep learning more, and we can keep doing better, and we can keep overcoming our grievances and our hurt and our hand-me-down trauma, so that we can get to a point where we're not fucking killing each other anymore. Listen, look after yourselves. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening to the rant. I'm going to go maybe get some sunshine on my face and finish my coffee with some fresh air. And I will say, Gaurav Mahagat, thank you very much for being with us here at the Irish Pagan School. If you want to keep in touch, pop down, hop on the link, join us on the mailing list. And until the next time, look after yourself. And slán. Goodbye.